Switch off your phones. Thank you very much. Shalom lekulam. Erev Tov. Hello, everybody here in the audience with us at the Begin Center in Jerusalem, and also those of you watching on Zoom in the US, Canada, the UK, wherever you are in the world. My name is Paul Gross. It's my pleasure to welcome you to another of our English language events here at the Begin Center. Those of you who are regulars will know that we have many events here dealing with both contemporary Israeli and Jewish issues, and also issues of Israeli and Jewish history. And we have a very, I think, a very fine record of launching some fabulous books here at the Begin Center, including books in English. I see in the audience a couple of authors of books with us here as well. And this evening is no exception. When I first encountered the book we're going to be discussing, I was reminded of a few years ago, a group of students came to the Begin Center from the United States. I think they were just starting university, and I was asked to speak to them about Menachem Begin, and I figured that rather than just give them the usual kind of biographical stuff about Begin, I would make it a little more relevant, and I talked about Begin as a sort of, as a dogma, as a model for Jewish students in a potentially hostile environment. And I talked about Begin's unapologetic Jewish pride, his Zionism, of course, which was Begin's Zionism specifically, I think, was fundamentally about liberation of the Jewish people and liberty. And it was a sort of, in so many ways, a standing rebuke to the Zionism's racism canard. And I was reminded of that because when I encountered this book that we'll be discussing and that you should all buy after the event, it's really, Isabella Taborowski has really done an extraordinary thing in that she's taken the compelling historical example, one of the great historical examples of Jewish pride, Zionist and Jewish pride, combined with activism of the most courageous and defiant kind, and used it to provide intellectual tools for Jewish students. And given what we all know about college campuses in the post-October 7th world, it's an example that I think is exactly what's needed. And we at the Begin Center are proud to be a venue for promoting exactly these kinds of messages, these kinds of educational tools. We're also very happy, once again, to be partnering with the Z3 Institute. We've done a number of events with them, and we're always happy to do so. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, our star speaker, Isabella Taborowski, and then she will introduce the rest of the panel, who you will, of course, be well acquainted with. Isabella Taborowski, the author of this remarkable new book, is a noted scholar of Soviet anti-Zionism and contemporary anti-Semitism. She's a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. She's a senior fellow with the Z3 Institute for Jewish Priorities in Palo Alto. She's the author of the Refusenik, a Jewish Student's Survival Guide. And I think, on a personal note, she's written more authoritatively and compellingly than anyone I can think of about the Soviet Union's anti-Zionism agenda, which has impacted so much of what we're dealing with today. Isabella Taborowski.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you so much to the Menachem Begin Heritage Center. Thank you also to the Z3 Institute, which has made so much of what we're discussing today possible, including this book. I'm going to say a couple of words about the book just to set us up for the discussion that will go on later today. And then I'll introduce Natan, who will say a few words, and then we'll have a conversation. So my book began with a conversation with David Hazony that he and I had 2 weeks after October 7th in Philly, as we were launching another book, Jewish Priorities, which he edited and I contributed to. We were in that post-October 7th days magnified by finding ourselves outside Israel's bubble of solidarity and by the sudden sharp realization that we Jews are a tiny minority in the world. And it was there at that jet-lag dinner at a Philly bar that David told me that I need to write a book about the Refuseniks and the meaning of their struggle for this moment. I couldn't say no. Nobody says no to David Khazoni. By then, I had been writing about the Refuseniks for years. I had long come to think of them as incredibly relevant at this moment, at a moment when anti-Zionism was rising and threatening American Jewish life. And I had also long come to think of them as the heroes we need today. I had long realized that in many ways, their struggle had been misunderstood. The Refusenik activist struggle is mostly remembered as a struggle for aliyah and broader immigration, and it certainly was. But it was also about something much more than that. What Refuseniks did when the state refused them permission to emigrate was nothing short of remarkable. They were branded as Zionists, expelled from universities, fired from jobs. They were pushed to the margins of society. And to be branded as Zionism in the Brezhnev USSR meant to be associated with every evil under the sun: Nazism, racism, fascism, colonialism, imperialism, genocide, apartheid, and more. And yet, in the face of that, the Refuseniks didn't beg and plead to be accepted back into the fold. They didn't try to argue with the propagandists. They didn't roll into a corner and go silent. They did the opposite. They reclaimed everything the state had wanted to deny them. They reclaimed their Zionism. They reclaimed Jewish history, culture, religion, and Hebrew for themselves. And they reclaimed their connection to the Jewish people and to Israel. Crucially, rather than think of themselves as the people who were refused something that they wanted, as the victims, they thought of themselves as the protagonists in their own story, as the people who proactively refused what they were offered, which is to assimilate into the antisemitic reality the state imposed on them. They refused to accept the idea that they had to live without a connection to the Jewish people, its history, its culture, and traditions. All the years they waited to be released, they worked to deepen who they were as Jews. And it was this defiance that became such a striking feature of who they were, and that was so deeply inspiring to American Jews and Jews around the world who came into contact with them. I began to write the book by wanting to tell their story to the younger generation. But then once I started writing and talking to today's activists, one of whom will be with us on stage today, I also realized that those who find themselves on the front lines of today's war are actually landing on some of the same strategies: the strategy of defiance, the strategy of refusal, and the strategy of reclaiming. And so it is my honor right now to introduce Natan Sharansky, a man whose life has come to define what it means to be a refusenik. From Soviet political prisoner to Israeli statesman, from dissident at a labor camp to a leader of the Jewish people, Natan Sharansky's life traces one of the greatest moral journeys of our time. I'm incredibly grateful for the relationship we have developed over the years and humbled by the support Natan has given this book, including by writing its foreword. So without further ado, Natan Sharansky.
Okay. Dear friends, here is relatively small but very powerful audience. I'm glad to see here my comrade in arms, one of the pioneers of struggle for social Jewry, Yosef Mendelevich. He spent more time in the prison than I did, so you should better take him seriously, and many other good things. I also see here not a lot of, but a number of very important voices in the dialogue and the struggle of Jewish world today, who are doing it in America, in England, and of course in Israel. But I do hope that you will help to make this book read by maybe less powerful but massive audience, because it's really very important book. And I'll try to explain briefly why. Well, Isabel, in fact, said everything, but I'll try to say it from a little bit different angle. No, two big wars in which American Jewry, the Western Jewry, involved after the Second World War is struggle for Soviet Jewry and struggle against anti-Semitism. And because struggle for Soviet Jewry was then so successful, and there were so many activists who spent 20, 25 years of their life helping to Soviet Jews from here, from America, and then it became such a big success. So I heard a lot of voices in the last 10 years that why shouldn't we simply repeat success? We'll be organizing this the same way, we'll be acting in the same way, and we'll be successful. And it doesn't work. There are so many seminars about it. Why it didn't work? Because, and I write a little bit about it in the foreword, because there was a very clear aim, one aim, with all the differences of many organizations who were fighting with one another, but in the end they had all the aim to bring down the Iron Curtain and to let the Soviet Jews be free. And there was clear who has to be blamed. Soviet Union, KGB, with all your differences, you agree. Our movement doesn't have such clear aim. Movement maybe does. Jews, they argue whether Zionism is part of anti-Semitism to what extent and so on. And they don't know whom to blame. People on the left are blaming anti-Semitism on the right and vice versa. And Israelis believe that if all the Jews will make Aliyah, there will be no anti-Semitism. And Jews of diaspora say that if there will be no Bibi, there will be no anti-Semitism. All types of shtuyot. And that makes it impossible to have really one movement. And believe me, I tried, many people tried in the last 20 years to do it, and it is impossible. What Isabella noticed, that in the last year, we have a hope. Why? Because now there is a real parallel to what happened in the Soviet Union. In the Soviet Union, all the Jews, majority of Jews, tried to be loyal Soviet citizens, tried not to say something against the stream, because all their career life depended. And then there was a very small group of Jews, well, the 78 is one of them, of course there were also the others, who started speaking in spite of this, against this law, what many people also felt. But they were the first who started saying. And that and then what brought the change. What happened with the American Jewry in the last 20, maybe more years, but simply I followed closely in the last 20, 25 years, that more and more Jews were saying, as though in Soviet Union saying, we are all part of international world of communism. They are saying, we are all international Jews. We are part of this great freedom for everybody, of great Tikkun Olam. I'm Jew because they believe in Tikkun Olam, which was very good. But then when you really have to fight for particular interests of Jews and Zionism, you feel ashamed, or you feel even angry that Israel makes you not to be universalist. As I heard it first time 20 years ago, but then in the last years more and more, if only Israel will not exist, it will be much easier for us as liberal Jews to be liberal Jews. And then what happened in the last 2-3 years, essentially after the 7th of October, but said before, that there is more and more voices in the universities, where in the last 20 years, the tendency was absolutely clear. You see the voices of young people who are ready to speak against the extreme. And that's why the letter of 500 students at Columbia University, which is mentioned and represented by one of the authors in this book, and which, when I read it, I thought, that is the turning point, because 500 Jews in Columbia University, and everybody who was in Columbia University after the 7th of October knows what it was there. 500 Jews are writing letters saying, we are Jews, we are Zionists, Zionism is part of our identity, and we demand from the United States government and from the leaders of the university, based on American laws, to defend us as Jews and Zionists. And that's the fact that so many young Jews said it, and then there is another, and then there are 13 universities in which young Jews went to the court against their own universities because the university doesn't defend them as Zionists and as Jews. That is a new thing. And Isabel noticed the parallel and wrote a book about it. So thank you, Isabel, and please, I ask everybody here to make sure that as many people will read this book as possible. Thank you. What's that? What is different? I'm on the left, as always.
Hey, everybody, you can hear me? It works, okay. So thank you so much, Isabella and Natan, for such powerful words. I'm David Hazoni, the director of the Z3 Institute, which is part of the Z3 project in Palo Alto at the Oshman Family JCC in Palo Alto, California. I know many of you, but there are many of you I don't know, especially those out on Zoom, and I want to welcome everybody who's watching from far away as well. This is a really important evening for me personally. Isabella, we've been talking about this and other projects for quite some time now. And I'm also amazed and pleased and thrilled to have Noah Shufutinsky, who was a contributor to the book that we launched last year, Young Zionist Voices, and is also interviewed in Isabella's book and is an educator with Stand With Us. And so I want to open up a discussion about some of what we heard. The thing that I don't think either of you mentioned, but I think to me has been so powerful about this line, historical line you're drawing between the Refuseniks and the young activists today, is that the Refuseniks were young. And we tend to forget this. They too were in their 20s, maybe some in their 30s. They too were kids facing what appeared to be a vast machine. And they didn't have the previous generation of Refuseniks or movements to draw upon. They really had to make it up as they were going. And for those of you who are too young to remember the Cold War and to remember the time of the Soviet Union, it felt immovable. It felt like something that would last forever. And it was, I was, as a high school student, I was actually in the Soviet Jewry movement, made my little contribution to the extent I could. I marched at rallies in Boston, and I still have a clip, a picture from the newspaper of me marching at a rally in Brookline, Massachusetts. It was a very defining moment for many American Jews as well. And yet, I've already seen some responses to your book. There's a question I'm going to ask you, but also Natan, I want you to. The people are saying, you're really going to compare these privileged Jewish Ivy League kids with the Refuseniks? Is that really a proper comparison to make? Or is it even, one person I saw wrote that it's even offensive to the Refuseniks to draw this comparison. So maybe if you could make the case about why this is really actually very, very relevant today.
Sure. So, as I write in the book, and I always say, there is a limit to every historical analogy, obviously. I'm not saying that today's America is Brezhnev's USSR, right? Not the same system, not at all. But there are echoes. There are echoes that we hear, and they come to us through the anti-Zionist propaganda that, in fact, was formulated in the USSR and made its way through complicated routes to today's world. There are echoes of responses by those who, or by, let's say, by the ways in which those who take on that propaganda and who believe in Israel's evil, the way they turn on Jews, the way they turn on their peers at universities, people who were with them just yesterday in their progressive spaces, right, who share every value with them, every progressive value, except that they also have a strong Jewish and Zionist identity. So the way they turn on them, the way they reject them, those echoes and those parallels are completely unmistakable. And so even though, of course, it's clear today's young people like Noah, who have faced the anti-Zionist machine head on at his university, he's not going to go to the gulag, thank God. However, every society has its own systems of punishment and its own gradations and its own ways in which it punishes those who kind of more than dissent, right, who stray away from adopted narratives and adopted ways of being. And so for young American Jews today, what could be worse than losing a possibility to be at a university, choosing a career path, losing your reputation? I mean, these are all very strong and powerful punishments. And so in that sense, a lot of times people will say, well, how can you do that? The system is completely different. It's not totalitarian. But in that sense, in the sense of ideological erasure and oppression and a pressure to set aside your identity, the pressure is similar. And so if the pressure is similar, it also makes sense to look at the responses and methods of resistance. And in that sense, too, I found a lot of similarities.
Natan, are you offended by the comparison?
Well, I spoke about it, tried to write about it. There is some very deep similarity, not in terms of ideology, though ideological, no doubt that so-called progressive thinking, woke thinking, is as much enemy of liberals thinking as a communist ideology. And all this division of oppressed and oppressors, that's exactly, if you replace the word race to the word class, and you get the text which we learned in Soviet Union. But it doesn't make this similar. It means simply that the world didn't learn the lessons. But what it really means similar, this young generation in the university, they are a very small group, go against the stream, against fashion, against the guarantees of your career in the same way as refuseniks. Because to see what is happening among Jews, it's very similar. Soviet Jews were absolutely afraid that somebody will say that they are less loyal to Soviet Union, that they have something against this ideology, even if they were against, but they were afraid that somebody will say it. You had to see how, when my friend David Bernstein wrote a book sometime years ago, Woke Antisemitism, it was before the 7th September, and I wrote forward how angry was organized Jewish community, absolutely angry, that what we support woke, we belong to woke, and you now, even if we agree with you, you could not say it publicly. There was a big debate how not to say it publicly because of compromise. So these young students today who are saying, I am Zionist, they make angry, they are taken away from WhatsApp groups. Today, there was no WhatsApp in our days, but they are canceled. And they have to be ready to be canceled in their community, among Jews. I'm not speaking now about American society. Inside Jewish community, they are almost canceled, but in fact, there are many more who think like this, but I'm afraid to say. From this point, analogy is absolutely right.
And I think what you're both saying is that what's most in common is the nature of the fear. Okay, that it's a fear, it's not like an immediate violent fear, though that can be part of it. It's a fear of being deemed worthless by the society around you, with all that comes with. And it can come with cancellation today, and back then it ultimately could end up with imprisonment in the gulag. But when you're a kid, going to college, and all you're thinking about is your own future, they're threatening you with your future. So it is very acute and real. I want to ask Noah a question, because we talk a lot, and you wrote a wonderful essay in Young Zionist Voices, which is also, by the way, for sale out out there. You wrote a wonderful essay about unapologeticism. And for those of you who don't know, Noah is also a rapper and a songwriter and a wonderful performer. And Isabel actually quotes the lyrics from your piece, Diaspora. Really beautiful. But you focused in your essay on this word apologeticism. And one of the things that comes out both in the stories of the Refuseniks and in your story and in everything you're doing is that this isn't just about those guys over there are bad, they want to hurt us, they want to reject us, so we have to fight them. That's not what's going on. There's something much more profound. There's something that you're fighting for. And it's something that is itself new to the Jewish conversation. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. First, it's an honor to be here and share the stage. I think that when we talk about unapologeticism and how it connects to what's written here in this book and the idea of having something to fight for, I actually think the perfect example upon reading and then rereading were these 18 Georgian Jewish families who, different from a lot of other Soviet Jewish communities, as what's described here, were relatively comfortable in a sense. Relatively, keyword on the relative.
Don't assume that people have read the book.
So that's a chapter, make sure you read and you focus in on it. So, but you have certain Jewish families in the Soviet Union, a select few, who had relatively comfortable lives. That didn't stop them from participating in this struggle. Even if they didn't feel like, hey, we have to fight against this other group of people, they were influential because they said, even if we ourselves feel relatively comfortable, we have brothers and sisters who are living here who we need to fight on behalf of, and the thing that we have to fight for is that identity, which is our connection to the land of Israel, and our right to be able to live there if we so choose, even if life in Israel wouldn't necessarily be as comfortable as it was in their particular situation. Now, how does that affect me and relate to me? I think that the goal of this sort of anti-Semitism, or one of the goals of anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, is to make us as a Jewish people see our identity as something that's reactive. It wants us to reduce our own identity and our own culture and traditions, and sometimes even strip that away, which is exactly what was done in the Soviet Union. That makes the only aspect of our identity how we respond to outside bullying. Now, that response to outside bullying at times can bring us together and make us feel united and bring us closer to our traditions, but that in itself is not enough to preserve who we are for generations. If it wasn't for the struggle of the Refuseniks and global Jewry to come to their support, who knows what would have happened a generation later.
So maybe if we can, want to press on this point a little bit. Knowing you speak to a lot of students, and Isabel, this is a question for you as well. How do they really need history? Do they really, I mean, they're on the campus, they're fighting, they have friends. Do you really need black and white photos of people from other countries far long ago to tell them how to fight this fight? What role does exposure, and I just want to say, one of the things that caused us to do this book, that got me to push you on this, was that just at the time that October 7th happened, immediately afterwards, there was something happening which, on the other side, called the Refuseniks, right? The students on campuses started referring to IDF soldiers who refused to serve. They're calling them Refuseniks. And I remember we had this conversation, and I have to say it was not a bar in Philly, it was a Whole Foods.
Oh, that too. There were places.
I remember saying, we can't let them take the label. We can't let them take away the name of this movement from the people who really fought for Jewish pride and for Jewish freedom. They took so many terms, took so many ideas away, and we have seen it in the last 2 years especially. We can't let them take this one. But in the lives of these students, these young Zionist voices who are really fighting very difficult battles on a lot of campuses, what role does the story of the Refuseniks play? Maybe start with Noah and Isabella.
So for me, this is a personal story because I come from a that community directly. My dad was born in the Soviet Union. He left at the age of 6 in 1981 before the Soviet Union had even completely fallen. So the story of the Refuseniks is something that I grew up with, and after October 7th and before October 7th, when we saw this rise of what many people would deem the new anti-Semitism, and you have members of the Jewish community who were shocked and said, maybe we can't speak out against woke anti-Semitism because it's uncomfortable. No one who shared my cultural background felt like it was a new anti-Semitism. It felt familiar to them. And I think that's one of the reasons why so many of the leaders today, the young people written about in this group, share an aspect of that identity because it was not new to them, because of that history. And maybe it's not just a black and white photo that you show to somebody, but it's a personal connection to their parents or grandparents who grew up in this movement. So I say, of course, we need history, and there's nothing better than a role model that you can give to a young person who's fighting right now.
Well, and I'm really glad to hear Noah say this because I speak as an educator and as someone who studies history, as a scholar of history. I happen to think that when you fight something, it's easier for you to do it when you know that you are not the first one to face what you're facing, and when you know that others have faced something like this. A lot of times when I speak, I will ask people, who are your Jewish heroes? Who are the Jewish heroes that you know? And in Israel, it's a question that people easily answer. But in America, a lot of times people will say, okay, well, there were the heroes of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and then they say they were the Maccabees, and then they don't really know what else to say. Well, but that's where I'm leading. That is really the point, is that a lot of times, somehow, first of all, this big part of the story that was such a big part of the American Jewish experience is forgotten. Somehow we have forgotten to incorporate it into our collective memory, right? There's history and then there's collective memory, and we haven't done it as American Jews. And why we haven't done it is a whole separate question. But then there is also the aspect of, look, in every, when you look at collective memory and how national stories are shaped, they generally speaking have two elements: victimhood and heroism, right? We were victims once, we were under attack, but we overcame, we found the courage, and we survived as a nation, and therefore here we are still today. I think it's probably, these are probably common in pretty much every national story. On the American side, it seems to me that we have really perfected the telling of the story of the victimhood, and we have forgotten the story of heroism. And I think the story of heroism is really important, and role models are important. And the way I wrote this book as stories, in particular, because I wanted for people to relate to the human element of what it means to be somebody like Natan Sharansky. What are the personal journeys that what people go through as they realize, wow, I thought that I belonged, and I thought that I was fine. I had a great career path ahead of me. I'm part of this great scientific institute that so few people get into. What else is there for me to wish for? And yet at some point, a point comes where you see something that you cannot unsee. And I often use this metaphor that I think at some point, these young people here and these young people here see a burning bush and they can't walk past it, right? They stop and they have to hear the message, and they hear the message. And once they hear it, they can no longer give it up. They can no longer, they can't not accept the mission. And so I think it helps when you are on this side, when you are a young person today, to know that there were young people before you who have done the same.
So this book is also a roadmap. It's a guide, it's subtitled A Jewish Student Survival Guide, and it's presented as a 6 steps to bringing down the evil empire in front of you. Step 1 is reclaim your Zionism. Step 2, educate yourself and others. Step 3, find your comrades in arms. Step 4, do the unexpected. I love that one. Step 5, reject victimhood. And step 6, and this is the one I want to focus on, lead with Jewish. And in each chapter, the book pairs a story of the, story of the Refuseniks with a story of young Jews today. Natan, the chapter that you appear in is called Lead with Jewish. It's the final big one. And I remember, I don't know if I heard you tell, I've heard you tell this story, and I probably read it in your book too, that in your experience in the Soviet Union and in the Gulag as well, in prison, you clung very strongly to, it was a book of Tehillim that you had, or to a book of Tehillim that you had, a book of Psalms that Avital had given you, and that, but that symbolized something far beyond the book itself. What does it mean to lead with Jewish, to put your Jewishness at the front of your struggle?
Well, if I'll be speaking about my experience, I will make different type of division. I had a period when I had to be ready to give up on my career, what means not to be afraid to destroy your career. Then there was a period when you had to accept that you can be arrested because being activist. That's when you have to overcome the fear of being arrested. And then the third grade, when you have to overcome the fear to be killed, to be sentenced to death. But how are you doing it? In fact, in every case, you're feeling yourself more and more involved in Jewish history. When you were interested with your career, you had zero connection with Jewish history, with Jewish people, with Israel. At least I know that Yosef's story is a little bit different. He had some Jewish background. I had zero. And then when I discovered my identity, which at that moment meant only Zionism, Six-Day War and so on, and you then discover what a great history there is. And you want to be part of this history. You look at the soldiers who liberated Jerusalem near the wall, and you understand they were of your age. And then you look at Yoni Netanyahu, his picture was on my wall when I was arrested, and he is exactly of my age. And now we have this unique privilege to be active participants of Jewish history. That gives you a lot of excitement, and that gives you also strength. And then you find out that the real source of all the energy, all the courage, all the determination is your feeling that is grounded in your identity. Well, you mentioned Tehillim. I had to say, religion came the last. First it was Zionism, then it was history, then it was culture. And then in prison, when you have to make this irrational decision that between cooperating with KGB and being killed, then it's irrational, but you feel you cannot make another decision. And then you start talking to God. But there was a great place to talk to God is prison. Direct. It's local line. See? And then I was good that I was lucky. You know prayers, so I invented my own prayers. It's easier to remember and then you really, and later from Tehillim, I took these words, Irad Hashem. In the beginning, it was difficult to understand. I didn't know it. Then I would simply compare where it appears in different places. And you understand that's exactly what you feel, that Irad Hashem, the fear of God, is stronger than fear of death because you're so deep inside. You don't need really to be deeply religious. Don't have to believe in all these great stories in order to feel inside your struggle that really the desire to be part of this Jewishness is much stronger than desire to survive.
And I can only imagine, there are verses of Tehillim, there are prakim of Tehillim that King David is in a very similar position, right? He's lost everything. He's hiding in Tsiklag or wherever, and he's praying to God, from the depths, right? It's chilling to think about. Let's turn and talk a little bit about the future. Natan, I'll start with you. After you left the Soviet Union, you became a political leader, and then you spent time as the head of the Jewish Agency, which is, if nothing else, it is the place to be thinking about the future of our people. With everything we've discussed and with everything we're seeing today in America and across the diaspora, and things have changed since you started writing this book, of course, but we've seen anti-Semitism rise. We've seen a government change in the United States that that might change the equation in different directions. Where do you see the future, and where do you see it as a hopeful future for diaspora Jewry?
Well, it's a big question. I'll try to speak a small part of it. I was practically more in all Jewish communities, almost in all Jewish communities, as the head of Jewish agency and before, and all of them, almost all of them, were in the process of assimilation, which maybe now is a little bit slower, but bigger. And there are only two engines of the brakes which are slowing this process. It's faith and Zionism. And faith in the broad meaning of this word, connection with the deep beliefs of our people and Zionism. If you have both, okay. If you have one of them, you can build. If you don't have this and this, your grandchildren will not be Jewish. It's true for America, for Mexico, for Australia, for South Africa, everywhere it is true. If you don't have a faith and don't have Zionism, your grandchildren will not be Jewish. So what was so frightening in American Jewry in the last 20 years, 15, in the last 5 years, after the previous war was in 21, I saw more and more Reformed rabbi, she was telling me that we have to learn how to build our identity without Israel. Because for 2,000 years, Jews lived as Jews without connection to Israel. And why do we have to connect? And I said, all your synagogue, all your group, if you will succeed, will not be Jewish. It's simply, you can see it, how it's happening in the world. So that's why for me it is so important that those now very few, but American young people start saying proudly, we are Zionists. And I think that, well, what makes me optimistic, because I believe in the future of Israel. I think that Israel today, with all of its hue and sound, it's more guaranteed than future of Western civilization, other parts of Western civilization. And to the extent that world Jewry will be connected to Israel, they don't mean only about Aliyah. I was never a commissar of Aliyah, that decision of everybody, but connection to Israel is the best guarantee of the future of Jews. And because I'm optimistic about Israel, I'm optimistic about Jews, but at the same time, the problems are huge.
Thank you. I want to ask the same question to Noah, and I'll let you have the last word, Isabella. Noah, you see the young people. You see the next generation. You go to many different places. You spoke at the Z3 conference in San Diego. But for Stand With Us, you do a lot of work going around North America. Are you optimistic about our future? And if so, why?
So I'm optimistic because I'm faithful and I'm hopeful, but I also want to stress that I believe we're at a critical moment with people who are in my generation that's dependent on whether my peers choose to fully reclaim and embrace Zionism. I had a conversation just the other day with someone who's not Jewish but sees himself as an ally and was going back and forth trying to convince me that maybe Zionism can be put to rest. We can support Israel for practical reasons, but do we need to say Zionism? Why would you say Zionism? It's not necessarily politically correct of a thing to say. It's too complicated to get into. And my automatic response is that Zion is an integral part of Jewish identity. And to that statement that you mentioned about a Reform rabbi saying for 2,000 years, Jews lived outside of Israel with no connection to Israel, I think that misunderstanding is the basis of why we're at this critical moment. Because to say that for 2,000 years in the diaspora, when we prayed, when we played melodies, when we spoke languages that were derived from what originated here in this land of Israel, to dismiss that as living without a connection to Israel, I think is outrageous. So we need to honor those sacrifices. We need to recognize this critical moment. And ultimately, I told this guy, I said, look, to tell me that I should drop Zion or Zionism from my identity is like telling me to describe myself as a Black American, as an African American without Africa. It's outrageous. You would never ask this of anybody else. And us as Jews, we need to demand that. Now, I can't fault this gentleman I spoke with, who's not Jewish, for that, because he is following the lead of far too many young Jews who are willing to hide their Zionism. And until us as a community make that an unacceptable position in our spaces, we're going to continue to have this issue where we're not going to have allies, and we're not even going to have allies amongst our Jewish brothers and sisters. Now, the reason I'm hopeful is because there's so many people, like you'll read about in this book, who are doing exactly that, who are reclaiming Zionism, who are reclaiming that Jewish identity and connecting with the role models that have been given to us.
Isabella, the last word is to you. Are you optimistic? You're a scholar. You're supposed to be kind of pessimistic about everything, right?
I choose to be optimistic, and I'll tell you why. It's a conscious and intentional choice. Look, the book came out fairly recently, but every time I've gone out to talk about it, and I've now talked about it in California even before it came out, and then on the East Coast since it came out, I can see that there are people who really want to hear the message of this book. And a lot of times, I would say maybe all of the times, essentially, these are people who come from grassroots. These are people who feel that they are not really being led in the way in which they want to be led. And I think that that is fine because, you know, I think that the next generation of leaders will come from the grassroots, because I think that the people who brought us to this moment, who lead the organized Jewish community, won't lead us out of it. You know, it's a little bit like here in Israel. You know, we need leaders who will come with new understanding of the situation, who will come with the experience of that direct struggle. And I think that there are people like that. You know, some of them are in my book. Maybe it's not everybody, but I think it's okay. You know, it's okay. And it doesn't have to be everybody. I think if there is anything that the Refusenik movement teaches us, is that it actually doesn't take a lot of activists to change the culture and to lead other people with them, to bring other people with them. And so because of that, I choose to be optimistic.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you to Natan Shuretsky, Isabella Tabarovsky, and Oshu Futinsky. I think we have time to open it up for some questions. Okay. How do you want to do this, Paul? Okay, go ahead. Just if you could just wait for the microphone and then say your name.
I'm Dave Schiller from Indianapolis. What will it take to wake up the current Jewish mainstream leadership to these realities?
What Isabella just now said, that salvation will not come from establishment. Salvation will come from the new activists. I have to say, struggle for soil Jewry, all the establishment was involved, but only after there was student struggle for soil Jewry, council for soil Jewry, activists. And as my wife taught me, when she was passing me, when I was released, and she was like passing me her role, she said, go only with activists, and you will know that you won when establishment will join and will take all the credit. Then you'll know you won. And that's more or less what's happening in every battle, and I hope in this. No, and legitimately establishment will take the credit, because establishment will bring money and will influence and connections. So we want establishment to be mobilized. But for this, we need these students from the university.
I think when their children become anti-Zionists. And I think that's too late, which is why I also agree that we need to have this base of activists who are ready to take the wheel when these Jewish establishment leaders realize I was wrong. It's too late for me to correct it, but thank God we already have people on the ground who started that process of correcting it.
Any other questions? All the way in the back. Hey, Dan.
Thanks for a great discussion. It's Dan Diker. A question for the panel, Natan. Hi, David, Isabella. The role of the heart and soul of Zion in Jerusalem, where we're sitting, the Israeli government, Israeli governments, civil society. We haven't heard much tonight about the role of Israel in enhancing, embedding, energizing the Zionist Jewish impulse in the diaspora. And it seems to me, as someone that immigrated to Israel 36 years ago, that it's essential that Israel embrace and energize the Zionist Jewish impulse and reality in those who are not yet living in Israel or will never live in Israel. To allow or to believe that diaspora Jewry, which is subject today to an unprecedented assault on its very connection to Zionism, seems to be an impossible task without the full embrace, passionate embrace of young people, young leaders, the government of Israel, and others. And I'd like to know what your sense is of that.
Well, look, this book is about very specific and very important topic, how Zionism of youth of today will work the same way as Zionism or the message from Israel worked for us, for Soviet Jews. Discussion, what is the right policy of Israel vis-a-vis diaspora, the whole different discussion. I spent all my life in this discussion. I would only say it is true that Israel must have much more focused policy of embracing Jews of diaspora, for sure. But to think that Israeli presence or that or another Israeli politics is what will make a change, no. In fact, when Israel is involved in diaspora Jewry by supporting one or another political party, it doesn't help. But when Israel is involved by strengthening this feeling of connection of Jews to their history, to their struggle, that's very good. Whether every politician understands, no. But that's also typical.
I'd like to also take a crack at it, since you did offer me the option of answering too, Dan. The State of Israel was founded in 1948. It was the first time that we had our own country in a very, very long time. And there are very fundamental things about running a country, a successful country, that has taken us a long time to fully internalize and figure out. And one of them is what people sometimes call soft power. If you look at, you walk down the street in whether in Tel Aviv or in Jerusalem, you might come across an Institut Français or an American Cultural Center, that these countries that pay money out of their government budgets to put little cultural centers around the world to get people to just be into France or into whatever, or a country that doesn't have a lot of money, like Greece, turns out is subsidizing Greek language studies around the world. And this is not to speak of the money that's put into Arabic language studies around the world. And they do this because countries, to succeed, need to be projecting themselves out and beyond, culturally, linguistically, in many, many, many different ways. And Israel is a little bit behind the game on this, okay? My personal opinion is that we don't need an extra $100 million for Hasbara to make arguments about why our cause is just. We need $1 billion, and we have a $140 billion budget, something like that. We can spare $1 billion for soft power through massive investment in Hebrew language study around the world, in Israeli culture spread around the world, in projecting power at the level of human life. and supporting our rappers. And by the way, notice I haven't even mentioned specifically the diaspora. I'm talking about Israeli culture worldwide. I think that there's a very large number of Jews in the diaspora who take the most pride in Israel when they see it ricochet throughout the culture around them. When they watch TV shows and suddenly there's a cool Israeli character came out of nowhere. The fact that Israel becomes a culture among cultures and has its own unique value added that it brings to the world, that gives Jews pride in a way that direct Hasbara investment doesn't. That's my humble opinion on it. Yes, here. Can we get the microphone for here? To the gentleman in the blue cardigan. Oh, is there a lady too?
The question I have goes like this, that growing up in a family that was religious and where you went to school, where you studied Torah and you learned about your forefathers, Abraham. Microphone's not on, now it's on, I turned it.
That's better.
Okay. Sometimes in life you just have to turn. So we as children looked at Jews not just as people, but as relatives, as family. In other words, we were descended from them, we grew up, and we're all part of the same family. And I think that helps to have relationships, concern, interest, and a desire to protect. And I'm wondering, how do we do that now if there's no historical background for many Jewish children and adults, that they don't have that picture? I mean, they see Jews as Jews, we're Jews, but whatever that means, it's not clear. How do we begin to move to the idea of our relationship and our family connection?
Isabel, do you want to take this?
I mean, I think it goes back to the same question of what do young people today know? What are they taking from their homes? What are they taking from their schools? It's partly what the book is about. Why is this important chapter of recent Jewish history not at all known to young people? The young people that I interviewed for the book, the one common denominator among them was that they all came from families where their Jewishness, be it faith or Zionism, or both, just as Natan says, was an important part of their upbringing. And so I think, to be honest with you, this is where it needs to start. I think families need to understand, Jewish families that are shocked at the fact that they have anti-Zionist children. I mean, for them, it may be too late, but young families need to understand that if they don't teach their children some fundamentals of that, then nobody really will, or it won't be as impactful. So it comes from family, and it comes from the choice of what are we teaching them. And I think we're at a pivotal moment where we have to be reviewing what are we teaching and what should we be teaching in addition or instead.
I think you have time for one more question down here. Row on.
Thanks. It'll be quick. I spoke once in Palo Alto to 200 young. Thank you, Natan. I'm Rawan. I'm half Syrian, half Lebanese. And I'm converting to Judaism. Is that what's going on?
It's very unfortunate because we need our friends among Muslims.
Don't say, even you, Natan, he's joking.
No, she's a great spokesman for Jewish people. Yeah.
Toda, Natan. Toda. And I'm proud of our friendship. So I spoke in Palo Alto to a group of 200 young Jewish students. And after that, I went and I spoke at a shul in Boston, massive shul. And they were so moved, they were in tears when they heard my story. But a lady said, "Why are you speaking to us? You should be speaking in mosques to the Muslims. What can we do?" And I told her, "Teach your children your Jewish history." I just came from Palo Alto, and they were teaching 200 young Jewish teenagers what's a challah. Without understanding your history, when you're pushed in the corner, how can you, as a Jew in America, defend Israel? Why is Israel relevant? So I have a lot of answers when it comes to Jewish diaspora. But I'm asking you, especially you, Nathan, but please feel free to answer. What do you do? What is the remedy for the students I meet in Israel who think Israel is irrelevant? For those who hate this country, although they are Israeli Jews?
Well, I have to say, though, it is very irritating, really very irritating to see one Israeli who is denying the value of the past, of Jewishness, or who refuses to serve in the army. It's very irritating. But I'm not concerned about the future of Israel, because as we saw on this 7th of October, it was unbelievable failure of our institutions. And on the 8th of October, we saw how all the country is mobilized. Everybody wants students, Israelis from Palo Alto, from any other place in the world. We are rushing to fight for Israel. So in Israel, it goes together with everything. So I'm much less concerned, though, of course, it is a concern. The fact that, as you said, so many Jews in the places that you were, young people didn't know what challah is or whatever, it's something of much more concern because we see how Jews are really disappearing. But I have to say, with all what you said, what you are doing, well, I'm doing something. But whatever we are doing, there is no replacement for Jewish family. And I always say when parents are coming to me, oh boy, my boy and my girl was in the university under such a awful influence that they are now marrying out, and it's not really important for them. And I say, when did you start talking to them about their Jewishness, about the pride of being connected to history? And you find out, no, well, it's not American way to impose and so on. So it is too late. When they came to the university and they start building their identity, fighting antisemitism, it's a little bit too late. There is no replacement for Jewish families, and so none of us sitting here can help to the millions of American Jews or diaspora Jews if the families are not mobilized to do it. Thank you.
This is great. Thank you all so much. I want to say thank you again to Paul and the Menachem Begin Center and to the folks at the Z3 Project and to all of you on Zoom. Thank you all for coming tonight. This has been amazing.
And I will be out there if people want to have their books signed.
Books, buy books.
And thank you,
Isabella
David,
will
for impeccable moderation as always.